G'day YouTube, Max Wright here, and continuing our journey into how Bitcoin is going to merge with the DeFi world. I've got a very cool guest on today, Edan Yago. Am I getting the pronunciation correct?
Yes, Yago. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So, Edan, you've been kind of working with what would you call it? What, a program? No. Anyway, well, where's my words gone?
Protocol.
Protocol. Thank you so
There you
much.
go.
Oh my goodness, geez, off to a terrible start. Called Sovryn, and it is one of the really exciting things in the DeFi space, and it's Bitcoin. Why don't you take us away? Give us the high-level view of what Sovryn is and what it wants to be.
Sure. So we're all familiar with Bitcoin. Bitcoin's amazing. It's this decentralized, incorruptible, permissionless global monetary tool that you can own yourself, right? You don't need a bank. You don't need an intermediary. You don't need to trust anyone, except if you want to actually do something with it, right? So if you want to put that Bitcoin to work, right? You want to trade it. You want to lend it. You want to utilize it in any way, which would be sort of like a higher level financial activity. And that type of financial activity becomes the basis for an economy. You need to go through an intermediary. And in doing so, you lose the very properties of Bitcoin, which are so important to us, the very properties of Bitcoin that we cherish. And so the Bitcoin project isn't complete until we have decentralized, incorruptible, and permissionless ways of making use of our Bitcoin, right? And so that is what DeFi for Bitcoin is about. And that is what Sovryn is about. Sovryn is an extension of the Bitcoin protocol, which runs on a Bitcoin sidechain, which allows users to do all of the things that they might want to do on Bitcoin, but provides an alternative to centralized services. So you can lend, you can borrow, you can get liquidity with your Bitcoin by generating Bitcoin-backed stablecoins, right? So you never have to sell your Bitcoin. If you only have Bitcoin, but you want more Bitcoin, you can leverage up your Bitcoin by taking a position, collateralizing with your Bitcoin. You can make markets, right? So some people are earning 200, 300% APY using their Bitcoin today on Sovryn without having to ever go through an intermediary. And that is what Sovryn's about. It's about making Bitcoin more sovereign and making the users of Bitcoin sovereign.
Awesome. What was that interest rate you just mentioned?
200 or 300% APY. It's much too high. It won't stay there. But right now it's available because the system is still new. And so, not all of the opportunities have been plugged.
Okay, we will definitely return to that concept before the end of this conversation. Now, let's talk about, I think, understanding the narrative and maybe even a little bit of Bitcoin history, cryptocurrency history. Look, Bitcoin came out. There was the thing in 2017 where there was this, we had Bitcoin Cash come out and this whole dynamic thing talking about, should we increase the block size? Should we do lightning chains? Should we come up with side chains? What should we do? And in the meantime, Ethereum and others kind of step forward and say, our Bitcoin's working too slowly. We're going to go and do DeFi. And they, with the promise of smart contracts and a whole bunch of things like that. And we see today, like this world's kind of emerging, like where there's two kind of trains of thought. One is you have this on the base layer one, which is like the smart contract, like Ethereum and Cardano and the lot. What you get is they're trying to do all these smart contracts, everything right there on layer one. Bitcoin's kind of gone this different path where Bitcoin is pure, it's simple, it's foundational, it maybe has some very good properties that the other chains have sacrificed, and it's going to be a relatively boring layer one money. However, it's going to allow some very exciting layer two DeFi solutions. Can you flesh that out a little bit and talk about the trade-offs of those two worlds and your opinion about where this ultimately leads?
Yeah, sure. So Ethereum and some other chains have made various trade-offs, right? And they've made choices. They've said, look, we would like to do all kinds of things with our programmable money, right? Which is what one of the things that Bitcoin is and that it invented. And we're willing to make certain sacrifices. Some of them are, that we're going to bloat the layer one system. Some of them are that we're going to reduce decentralization, but various different trade-offs. Now, Bitcoin has been unwilling to make these trade-offs. And I think that makes a lot of sense, because the one thing that sort of separates Bitcoin from everything else is that Bitcoin is a sound money and is designed specifically to be a sound money, which is protected from even nation state level attacks. And so Bitcoin said that that is such a special property that we can't ever sacrifice that property. And so you have Bitcoin, which is money, and then you have all of these other chains or other projects, which are technologies, right? And they're competing amongst each other on features. Now, some Bitcoiners have, over the years, said, Ethereum is a scam, Ethereum doesn't produce anything of value, and I think that's totally false. I think Ethereum has clearly proven itself to be a valuable technology. In fact, one of the most successful technology projects in recent history, right? And so, to my mind, what Bitcoiners should be doing is looking at the entire crypto space, right? This entire world that has evolved around Bitcoin and saying, what here makes sense? And if something makes sense, they should look to bring that into the Bitcoin ecosystem and build it on the solid foundation that is Bitcoin.
Gotcha. And so again, so these two worlds are kind of separating here, where that Bitcoin's opted for layer one simplicity, and it's going to do a lot of the DeFi stuff on layer two, which is where kind of Sovryn and others come in. So maybe can you give us a little bit of the broad strokes of this entire landscape? Because I know you know about a lot of different protocols out there and a lot of different things in the Bitcoin space. So you've mentioned a little bit on what Sovryn does. What else is happening in the Bitcoin DeFi? Because I feel like the Ethereum stuff and the Uniswaps and the chain links, and that it all gets us a lot of news, and I think we're quite well versed in this. But meanwhile, there's this thing happening in the Bitcoin world that is very underreported. And my kind of gut so far from where I'm feeling it is that it is a very undervalued space. It's not getting much of the headlines. It's not getting much of the attention. And I think it's as exciting, if not more exciting, than everything's happening over there. So from a greedy point of view, there's the investor factor. It's like, I love to find things that are undervalued. But then also, as a liberty-minded person, someone who wants all the promises of this thing and what cryptocurrency is, which is going to be the best way for me to go to support that? So maybe there's a lot of questions in there. You can take that wherever you want.
Sure. So let's talk about, first of all, why this is exciting, right? So I think we all know that Bitcoin is the center of gravity of this entire space. When Bitcoin goes up, everything goes up. When Bitcoin goes down, everything goes down. But even on a longer time scale, right? If Bitcoin succeeds in becoming this global reserve money, then the entire financial system is going to reconstitute itself around this new form of money. It's going to be as permissionless and as digital, or at least it has the potential to be. And so the exciting thing about DeFi on Bitcoin is that if you believe that Bitcoin is the most likely asset to become the reserve currency of the future, and I do, then what you are looking at when you're looking at DeFi for Bitcoin is you're looking very likely at what is effectively going to be the entire financial system 15 or 20 years from now. So if you think disruptive technologies, right, Bitcoin is eating money, and Bitcoin-based DeFi is going to eat the banks and the hedge funds and the pension funds and the sovereign wealth funds, and it is effectively going to do what Google did to newspaper advertising, but to the entire financial space. So it's very hard to overestimate the potential impact that this might have. Now, as a result, there are a number of projects that are trying to approach us and are looking to build out DeFi for Bitcoin, right? So there's, for example, what you mentioned earlier, Thorchain, right? So Thorchain is a different chain, not really connected to Bitcoin in any way, but it allows people to sort of perform a kind of atomic swap where they can trade their Bitcoin for some kind of asset on another chain without going through at least one centralized intermediary. So that's potentially exciting. It's not exactly DeFi for Bitcoin, but it is DeFi which interacts with Bitcoin. Another thing that we're seeing is Ethereum has almost 1% of all the Bitcoin represented on its chain. And the vast majority of that is represented in the form of wrapped Bitcoin. So what is wrapped Bitcoin? Wrapped Bitcoin is a token that is issued to people by a company called BitGo. If I give BitGo a Bitcoin, they will give me a token, an ERC20 token on Ethereum called wrapped Bitcoin, and then I can go and interact with the DeFi protocols on Ethereum. Now, this also isn't exactly DeFi for Bitcoin, because while you're interacting with a DeFi protocol, you are not decentralized yourself, right? You are entirely reliant on the centralized intermediary, in this particular case, BitGo. And then there's a third project called Stacks. Stacks, I think, of the three that we've discussed so far, is the closest to being true DeFi for Bitcoin, but it has its own coin, a separate chain. But what they've done is they've developed ways to have that chain interact with the Bitcoin chain and to sort of borrow some of its security. So those are, I think, the three big ways that people have been tackling DeFi for Bitcoin until Sovryn. And what has sort of Sovryn brought to the table? Where Sovryn is different is that Sovryn is a pure play vertical system, right, which is integrated directly into the Bitcoin system. And it's integrated into the Bitcoin system primarily in two ways. The first is that it runs on a side chain called Rootstock. And Rootstock is a separate chain, but it's merge mined with Bitcoin. In other words, it's the Bitcoin miners who mine it, and it borrows from the security of Bitcoin directly. The second thing is that unlike every other chain that you've ever heard of, it doesn't have a native coin. What it does is it uses the world's most popular cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, as the native coin. In other words, Rootstock, instead of trying to be a separate chain or a separate ecosystem, is an extension of the Bitcoin ecosystem. And Sovryn is built on top of Rootstock and provides you with probably what is today the richest set of DeFi tools of any protocol in the world, right? So some of the things that I mentioned before: lending, trading, margin trading, Bitcoin-backed stable coins, the ability to issue new tokens and launch new projects, all of which is secured by the Bitcoin network itself and powered and paid for in Bitcoin, so that Bitcoin is the true currency there. And so I think if you think about it in those terms, what Sovryn represents is the first true fully realized version of what Bitcoin for DeFi is, and shows how not just one specific a type of activity can be built on Bitcoin, but rather any financial primitive, any type of financial activity can be rooted in Bitcoin, complement Bitcoin, and extend from Bitcoin.
And I guess if we just hone in on the security aspect here, what you're saying is this side chain is if we define a chain as secure as the amount of hashing power behind it, we say right. Bitcoin is the most secure. What you're saying is with these side chains, they are protected. The security mechanisms are protected by the same hashing power of Bitcoin. Is that correct? That's
correct. Now, for example, Rootstock has between 60 and 75% of Bitcoin's hash rate devoted to it. So it's not as secure as Bitcoin, but that rate is growing. And as it grows, it gets closer and closer asymptotically to the security of Bitcoin main chain from a consensus perspective. Now, it will never be quite as secure because anytime you have a derivative, you're taking on multiple risks, right? So now you're taking on Bitcoin main chain risk and you're taking on Rootstock risk. But asymptotically, it gets very, very close. And then the other really interesting property of it is that the fees on Rootstock are all paid in Bitcoin. And to whom are they paid? They're paid to the Bitcoin miners. And so some people are concerned, like, what happens when the Bitcoin subsidy stops or gets small? Will Bitcoin be able to continue to grow and maintain its security budget, right? The security budget being what is paid to the Bitcoin miners. And Rootstock shows you that as you introduce new use cases, right, you actually expand the potential budget that is available. And so when you're using Rootstock, not only are you secured by Bitcoin, but you're securing Bitcoin.
Yeah, very cool. Help me understand it, just so I'm getting there. So if you're why is it only 65%? In my head, I've got like a miner is out there mining Bitcoin, and I'm guessing that there's a small tweak they can change to the software they're running where they can also be mining this simultaneously. And it's just some percentage of miners have chosen to do that and some percentage have not. Is that correct?
Yes. So it's not exactly a small tweak. You also need to be running a rootstock node. And that will continue to be the case until we introduce into Bitcoin what's known as blind merge mining, which would mean that really Bitcoin miners wouldn't need to know anything about the other chain. But today, in order to maintain the security of both chains, the miners need to know what's happening on the other chain to know what they're validating.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a relatively low expense, but it is an additional thing that needs to happen. And so that's part of the reason that it's not 100% yet. The other part of the reason that it's not 100% yet is this is all very, very new. And so while we've been seeing rapid growth, awareness is going to take time. Some miners are slower than others, and it's just going to be a process that will take some time until all miners realize that they're basically leaving money on the table.
Yeah. Okay. So that's really cool. So this this side chain has has the like you said, it'll never be 100%, but it should approach it very much so where the security of this side chain is the same as the security on Bitcoin, which is huge because that's something that no other chain can compete with at present, at least. Anyway,
the remarkable thing about Rootstock is even today, with even when it has like 50% of the Bitcoin market, right? In terms of hash power devoted to it, it's an order of magnitude more than the second best, which is Ethereum, right? So Bitcoin proof of work is so dominant that even when you have a fraction of Bitcoin proof of work devoted to securing your chain, it's substantially more hash power than any other chain.
Okay. And circling back to those trade-offs that the different chains have done, which that Bitcoin has chosen security above all else. But it seems to have this solution in layer 2 solutions coming through. Now, it took a little bit longer than the Ethereums and the Cardanos and whatever else. But once we get there, do you anticipate, is there things that Bitcoin will just, and the layer 2 solutions of Bitcoin will just never be able to get to compete with the other altcoins? Or do you think it will be as full a suite of projects that the others can do?
So I think there's one thing that Bitcoin will never be able to compete on, which is centralization, right? And centralization can sometimes have benefits. So if you look at sort of Polygon or Binance Smart Chain, right, BSC, they are both more centralized than Ethereum. And today they have 11 times the transaction volume of Ethereum, which is crazy because that happened in less than 6 months, right? They basically went from nothing to 11 times the size of the transactional volume. So that is a scary thought. And I think one of the reasons that we need to have projects like Sovryn and hopefully multiple different projects that are competing to do this kind of thing is because what we want to be able to do is get to the point where decentralized services are not just able to compete, but they outcompete, right? So they're more convenient, they're faster, they're more seamless than their centralized competitors. And I think that we are on the way there. So there's several inherent advantages to a decentralized service that a centralized service cannot compete with. One is it's not going to go down, right? So exchanges crash every time the price pops, right? Chains do not, because they're so robust and because they're built for reliability. Chains also never ask you for KYC, which is extremely frustrating and extremely dangerous to provide, right? You're giving your information over and over and over again to providers that you don't know what they're going to do with it, and you know that they frequently get hacked. And the ability of the decentralized services to attract many, many developers who will build on them is much greater because these these protocols are credibly neutral by being decentralized. And so you know you're not going to get screwed over by the platform on which you're building. So these are really big advantages. And then there's maybe the biggest advantage of all, which is that decentralized protocols are not regulated. They operate on a truly digital global scale, just like our digital global world, whereas the centralized services are constantly being regulated, right? So, you know, every single time somebody launches a new service, right? Initially it was, you know, like, let's take an example, right? It was Bitfinex, right? Bitfinex was not regulated. Then Bitfinex became regulated and people started moving over to other exchanges. And then BitMEX came out and everyone moved to BitMEX because there was no KYC. And then BitMEX were forced to introduce KYC and everyone moved over to other exchanges. And then, you know, we saw the growth of Deribit. And Shapeshift, the same thing happened. And Binance, the same thing happened. There's a huge demand out there for truly, credibly decentralized services. And one of the interesting things about Sovryn is I think it's one of the first, maybe the first protocol, which is credibly decentralized. It's built to be decentralized on the most decentralized platform that ever exists. And so you know that when you move to using Sovryn, you will never be forced to go anywhere else. So these are very big advantages that decentralized platforms or protocols have over centralized competitors. And I think it's important that we as a community build out these systems and make sure that people are aware that they should be using them so that we can make sure that the trajectory that we're going towards is a trajectory towards freedom rather than a trajectory towards what happened to the internet, which was freedom that turned into centralization.
I want to do a deep dive on Sovryn, what you can actually do, the roadmap there and stuff. But one more question before I get there. If you look at the amount of programmers or brain power working on DeFi in the altcoin space compared to the amount of brain power working in the Bitcoin DeFi space, I feel like you're as well positioned as anyone to have a pretty good feeling for that. Can you give us a feel about where that is in terms of levels? And well, I guess once I get the answer, the follow-up question will be, you know, how can one compete with the other, and what are the mechanisms to balance that out?
Well, there's vastly more people working, for example, on Ethereum DeFi project than are working on Sovryn, for example. Is that a problem? To an extent, it is. You know, it would be great if there were 10 times, you know, in just the last few months, the number of developers who have been contributing to Sovryn has increased, you know, tenfold to over 70, right? But it's still very, very small in comparison to the entirety of the Ethereum ecosystem. So yes, I think we will continue to see growth in those developers, and I think that's important. At the same time, a huge amount of the work that is being done in DeFi is effectively Ponzi-nomics, you know, clones and projects which are doomed to failure. And I think it's actually a blessing that we have Ethereum, because Ethereum is the move fast and break things chain. It's the best place to try out, or at least until recently was the best place to try out a new idea. You know, move fast, try it out cheaply. If it catches fire, awesome. And most of the things don't catch fire. And even those that do usually just burn up, right? So the Bitcoin attitude, I think, can and should be different, which is that we should be extremely aware of what is happening in the rest of the ecosystem, but we should avoid the pitfalls of sort of having to run after every new trend and rather focus on building those things which have proven fundamental value. Lending has proven fundamental value. Trading has proven fundamental value. And so those are the things that the devs and Sovryn are working on. And because there's this built-in audience of Bitcoiners who want to use Sovryn, and because there's also not the whole sort of like Ponzi clone competition that is happening, the work is purely focused on what is going to be delivering value to the end user, instead of sort of like all kinds of liquidity mining programs and things that, you know, clearly have extremely short shelf lives. So there is a huge amount of investment in Ethereum. Most of it is wasted, and I think that's great.
it seems certainly a way this could go is that, or it's the entire altcoin space, and Ethereum included, largely is a test net for Bitcoin DeFi. It's just exactly as you said, which we're learning from it, we're watching it, it's giving us ideas, and then it's been able to be brought in. All right, I think that's given us a good background on the whole landscape of the things. Let's zoom in and spend the rest of the time on Sovryn. First question, right now today, what is it that I can do on the platform?
So today you can do all of the core functions that most people would like to do. That you can borrow either dollars or Bitcoin, and soon other tokens as well, on the basis of your collateral. So you can use your Bitcoin as collateral. You can lend.
So sorry, you can use your Bitcoin to borrow what? Tether or
dollar? Yeah, Tether or other stablecoins. Yes.
Okay, and you can do that right now.
Yes, right now, including Bitcoin-backed stablecoins. Yes.
Okay, so hang on. For example, what is the interest rate that I could borrow a Tether or USD, say, whatever it's called?
Right. So today it's very high. So I'd encourage anyone who wants to make money to get some stablecoins onto the system. The reason it's high is because the system is in the middle of transitioning from having USDT being the primary centralized stablecoin to having what we call XUSD, which is this aggregated stablecoin, which can be turned into any of the centralized stablecoins. And so in that transition process, the interest rate, I think today is 33%.
33%. So, yeah. Okay. And I'm guessing the corollary of that is if you're lending stablecoins,
yeah, so that's 33% to the lender. Borrowers are paying something like 100% today. The typical rates are, though, more typically around 9 to 14%, right?
Okay.
The other thing that you can do is you can lend out your Bitcoin. Now, the Bitcoin lending has only really just started, and the rates are still relatively low. They're competitive with what other centralized services provide after a certain amount, so they're around 1%. But we expect to see them rise to about 3 or 4% over the coming few weeks, right? And we think it's going to be absolutely the best place to lend out your Bitcoin because you have no intermediary, you don't have counterparty risk, you don't have to provide your KYC, and so you can maintain your privacy in your financial activity while at the same time earning yield on your Bitcoin.
Gotcha. So right now you can lend your Bitcoin for 1%, and that will be lent to someone, and then it will be fully backed with some kind of reserve ratio.
More than fully backed, yes. At least 150%, yeah.
At least 150% in lots of different collateralization. So it could be Ether, it could be stablecoin, it could be.
That's right, yeah.
Okay, very cool. Very cool.
Then you can also utilize buy and sell Bitcoin-backed stablecoins, which are cool because they're backed by Bitcoin, but they are designed differently from other sort of collateralized stablecoins and tend to have much more stable price parity. You can also trade. So they're not the entire plethora of tokens on Sovryn, and over time I expect more and more will be added. But right now it's primarily Bitcoin, stablecoins, Ethereum, BNB, and a few other tokens which are native to the Bitcoin ecosystem, such as MOC and DOC, so money on chain. And so you can trade those either with spot or with margin, up to 5x margin. So all of this is already available today. And from the 21st, which is in a few days, there will also be the Origins platform. And the Origins platform is effectively a launch pad for other projects that are building in the Bitcoin DeFi space. And so the first project that's going to launch on Origins is Babelfish. And so you can participate in learning about new projects and finding out if they're projects that you think you would like to support. And then one final thing is there are NFTs built into the system. There will soon be an NFT market, and I think we're going to start seeing use cases for NFTs on Sovryn that exist only on Sovryn and are potentially extremely exciting.
Okay, cool. I mean, that's quite a suite.
Yes.
So give me an idea of kind of depth of the pools, amount of money being traded? Are we into significant amounts yet, or are we early stages?
There's roughly $60 million in the different pools. Including the fund staked for governance, there's over $1 billion managed by the system. And daily trading volumes across the system are something between sort of $5 and $8 million typically on weekends, and $10 and $15 million on weekdays. So, the platform's been live for a little bit less than 60 days now, and has been growing quite rapidly. So already we've reached fairly significant numbers.
So when did you guys launch? Let's understand that growth curve.
I don't remember the exact day, but it was about 60 days ago that sort of the limits were taken off and people could start transacting. Anyone could start transacting with the system. Yeah.
Okay, so now so the limits are off now, and as fast as the system can grow, it can grow.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So that's an exciting suite of things that can be done right now. What about roadmap? Looking forward, what have you guys got up your sleeve?
Yeah, so there are a number of, the way Sovryn works is there are different independent teams that are effectively working on different parts of the project. So I can tell you about some of the work that I'm aware of.
Please.
Right, so there's a team that I'm deeply involved in, which is working on the front end. The front end has been progressing and improving rapidly. One thing that we've recently introduced is a fiat on-ramp. So, if your friend asks you, where's the best place for me to get into Bitcoin, you can now say Sovryn, and they can go utilize, transact, effectively use a credit card or something to buy Bitcoin, and immediately be in an environment where they control their own keys, where they can trade without ever having to go through an intermediary, and sort of introduce them from day one into Bitcoin as we would like Bitcoin to be. So that's, that's the whole sort of front end. And then there's also a team working on analytics to provide better analytics tools to users. And then there's sort of like the really big features that different teams are working on. So there's a team working on perpetual swaps, so decentralized perpetual swaps, where you could use your Bitcoin to take high leverage or low leverage positions on effectively any asset that you want. There's more work being done on different ways of generating Bitcoin-backed stablecoins. There's been deployed a bridge to BSCN and a bridge to Ethereum, and the team that's working on bridges is working on making the bridges faster, better, and adding them to more chains so that effectively it integrates with the entire crypto system. And there's a couple of projects which I think are really interesting in terms of the scope and ambition of how they're demonstrating that Sovryn's goal is to become a financial operating system for the future. One of them is working on a way to provide mortgages without having to go through a bank intermediary. And the other is working on a way to provide pensions to people that are secured by cryptography and Bitcoin rather than secured by the state, right? Because one of the things that happens when you take out a pension is you have to trust that in 40 years, the state isn't going to be bankrupt and is going to pay you out. And those are, mortgages and pensions are two of the biggest pieces of the entire financial space. And so there are people in Sovryn who have basically said to them, let's go after the biggest chunks of the market and are making real headway.
Awesome. Now, I want to revisit the stable coin. So this is a Bitcoin-backed stable coin. Did you mention, is it XUSD? Is that what you mentioned?
Yes, so XUSD is effectively the name for the aggregated stablecoin. So it's got USDC in it, and Tether in it, and DAI in it, and BUSD in it. And so it makes it extremely convenient because you can choose, like you could be using XUSD, but like if you wanted to go into an exchange or you want to go into a different chain, you can effectively exit with your stablecoin of choice.
Gotcha. Okay, so is there a Bitcoin-backed stable coin?
Yes, so there's a Bitcoin-backed stablecoin called DOC, or Dollar on Chain.
Okay.
And there's a couple of other Bitcoin-backed stablecoins that are in the works as well, and are likely to be aggregated as well for a higher degree of security. And so one of the Bitcoin-backed stablecoins that is currently under development could come with a really interesting feature and might be out in the wild as soon as like 4 to 6 weeks from now. And what it will provide is also a way for people to take out zero interest loans so long as they're backed by Bitcoin, right? So Bitcoin is this pristine collateral, and so long as you're willing to over collateralize, the protocol can do something which no centralized service can do, which is offer you zero interest loans. So you could be living on Bitcoin without ever seeing the amount of Bitcoin that you have diminish through interest payments, and basically never have to sell Bitcoin ever again.
So let's go in. I mean, let's pick one. Let's choose that one, for example. I'd like to start to understand a little bit about what's going on in the background in terms of their pools operating here, how they're working together, where are the risks, where are the risks to who's holding those coins, what's it being used for, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. So one of the principles that has guided the development of Sovryn is that Sovryn, while innovative in many ways, is not innovative when it comes to smart contracts. The approach that Sovryn and the Sovryn community have taken is to use those things which already are known to work. So, for example, the spot trading is done via an AMM, very, very similar to Uniswap. The margin trading, again, based on Fulcrum, which is a protocol which has already been out in the wild for a long, long time. The governance system borrows heavily from Compound. The way that the devs have approached this is basically to look at those pieces of tech which are already proven and hardened in the wild, utilize them, build a vertically integrated system where all of these pieces fit really, really tightly together, and then make sure that that is even more audited, has even more units tests, and has an even bigger bug bounty behind it than it did previously. So, you know, Bitcoiners have a very, very security conscious approach, and that has also guided the way that Sovryn is developed.
Yeah, I guess returning to that concept of, well, these altcoins are the test net for Bitcoin DeFi, and we can just nab some ideas off of there. This is very cool. All right, so let's talk about the Sovryn token and understanding it. I'll put my investor hat on for a second. What's how does it work? What's the tokenomics, and why would I invest in Sovryn if I choose to?
So I think people have been very skeptical about tokens which aren't Bitcoin for a very long time, and with good reason. Most of them have just been another attempt to invent new money out of nothing, right? And that's after a while, it certainly becomes a cheap trick. So with Sovryn, the approach has been different. There is a token, it's called SOV. And SOV is not a cryptocurrency at all. It's not used for payments in any way. It's not expected to be used in a transactional fashion. And the user never needs to know about or use SOV in order to interact with Sovryn. What Sovryn is it's a token which allows users to participate in the governance and coordination of the community by voting, by participating in risk where there is risk in the system, and in return to earn yield, right? And what is that yield? That yield is that Sovryn protocol earns fees on pretty much everything that happens on the Sovryn protocol, right? So trades, loans, all of these generate fees. Like a loan will generate origination fees as well as ongoing interest payment fees. Those fees are collected by the protocol itself and then are distributed to the users who are actively participating in governance. So what that means is that if you, so SOV is not really a token which is designed to be passively held, but it does accrue value. And the reason it accrues value is because if you believe that Sovryn has a chance of succeeding in the way in which I've described, right, in the way in which the people who are working on it believe, if you think that Bitcoin DeFi is a big thing, if you think that disrupting finance is a big thing, then you could easily imagine a world in which substantial fees accrue to Sovryn, even if the fees are quite low, right? I mean, look how much fees are accruing to Bitcoin or accruing to Ethereum, right? Except when you hold Bitcoin or when you hold Ethereum, because what you're holding is a currency, you don't earn the fees that are accruing to those protocols. With Sovryn, the linkage is very, very tight, right? Whatever is earned by the protocol is ultimately going to be paid out to an SOV holder.
So just to understand that, if you hold a balance, you'll actually you'll see that balance go up in time. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, cool.
But again, this is not designed for passive holders. And in fact, it gets even more sophisticated than that. So governance is a difficult thing. And blockchains are really interesting because what a blockchain is, among other things, is a technology for coordinating people. Coordinating the efforts of a very, very, large and distributed other. And so the design of the governance system was an extremely important part of the design of the Sovryn protocol overall. And what Sovryn has done, which is different from pretty much every other protocol, is Sovryn has said that you can earn more fees if you stake for longer. And the reason is because we want to incentivize people to stake for very, very long periods of time. In order to force them or incentivize them to think about the long-term good of the protocol rather than, short-termism, to avoid the perils of quarter-to-quarter sort of thinking as exists in public companies, and to avoid the perils of potential governance attacks or low participation that occurs in DeFi protocols. And so I think there are a lot of thought that went into designing a governance protocol that incentivizes active participation only among those who have the patience to have a long-term view of the protocol.
So let's see if I can say it back to you so I understand that. All Sovryn holders will earn fees. However, people who lock up their Sovryn for longer periods of time earn more fees, and there's probably a graduated system. The longer you choose to lock it up, the greater percentage of fees you get.
So a couple of things. First of all, I would make a distinction between Sovryn and SOV, right? And I think that distinction is important because you can use Sovryn without even knowing that SOV exists.
Yes.
Beyond that, no. If you're just passively holding SOV, you actually don't earn anything because there's no reason to pay you anything, right? The reason people get paid in Sovryn is because they're doing something for the community. What are they doing? They're examining potential proposals. They are making assessments about whether or not these proposals are good for the protocol or not. Are they risky or not? And in that, they are basically protecting all of the users, right? So they are being told, if you do the work to make sure that this protocol evolves in the best way possible, then you will earn, and that's the way it's structured.
Okay, so if that in that case, SOV holders who participate in the votes that come up, they're in order to participate in the votes, you have to lock up the SOV. They're the ones who earn the fees. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
So in order to earn the fees, you have to both lock it up for a long time and participate in the votes. How often are votes done in the system generally?
Over the last 3 months, there have been about 20 votes, 3 or 4 months, yeah.
Okay. Good to know. And what about the supply? Is it a fixed supply? Is it a growing supply? What about the supply of SOV?
The SOV was issued with 100 million tokens, right? So it was like a symbolic nod to the number of Satoshis that exist in a Bitcoin. And more can be created. And the reason more can be created is because in a worst case scenario, if something really bad happened to the protocol and the protocol needed to recover in some way or pay out to cover losses in some way, it would be possible for governance to choose to mint new tokens. Now, of course, governance is not incentivized to do this because these would be, distributed not to the governments, but effectively sold. And it would also require a very high degree of consensus. It would require, I believe, 80% consensus, right? So it is an unlikely scenario, which is designed to counter a different kind of an unlikely scenario.
Okay. So other than that, the supply is fixed at 100 million.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Now I went and checked out CoinMarketCap to look up SOV, and I couldn't find it. It's not there. Help me understand. I think you mentioned it just before we went live that it's now available on Uniswap, but prior to that, it was only available in its own exchange. Can you talk a little bit about how does one get SOV and what that whole world looks like?
Yeah, so it's really easy. I mean, you just go into the Sovryn protocol, right? And I think the easiest way is through the Sovryn SOVRYN.app, right? You click on that and you're in. And you can even just use your credit card to get into the system and to start playing around. One of the reasons that we chose to list on Uniswap was because Rootstock is new, Sovryn is new, and so CoinMarketCap or CoinGecko don't read from that chain. That's probably going to change over time. But in the meantime, we wanted to give people the ability to have greater visibility. And so one way to do that was to list SOV, the token, on Uniswap.
Yeah, cool. And that happened just a few days ago.
That's right.
Is that correct? Yeah, cool. So now when you're buying on Uniswap, are you getting native token or are you getting a wrapped SOV?
You're getting, I would call it pegged SOV. So
pegged SOV.
Yeah. So it goes through the bridge, right? And it's called ESOV, Ethereum SOV, so to differentiate it from sort of SOV on its native chain. Mm-hmm. But you can move it back. So it's equivalent on a one-to-one basis to SOV.
Gotcha. And the total market cap of SOV at the moment?
So it depends how you look at it. The circulating supply, I think, has a market cap of about 150 million. But fully diluted, it would be much higher because Sovryn has those 100 million tokens are going to be released over a 7-year period.
Okay. So at full dilution, what would it be at? Do you know?
I actually don't remember offhand. Sorry.
Okay. No worries. Okay, cool. Let me think. We've only got a few more minutes before we get to the top of the hour. I know you have to run. Is there anything that you would like to leave my viewers with in terms of anything? Where would you like to? What do you think is most important that you want to impress upon them?
Well, I think that from my perspective, what's interesting about Sovryn, what's unique about Sovryn, is that it is decentralization of finance designed specifically to be sort of like, if Bitcoin is king, I always say, Sovryn is its queen, right? It's like, it's the pair of those two things that I think completes the Bitcoin mission. And to the extent that we're able to perfect that pairing, and to the extent that we're able to perfect Sovryn, I think we have constructed the basis for a world in which finance is permissionless, transparent, and free, and most importantly, incorruptible. And I think that is one of the most important missions that we could all be involved in supporting over the course of our lives.
Very, very cool. There's one more thing I wanted to return to. I think at the very top of the show, you mentioned something about 100 or 200% interest on Bitcoin. And I said, I promised to return to it, and then I forgot. Luckily, I remembered it. How is that available? Where does one get that?
Yeah, so that takes a little bit more sophistication, but there's a few ways in which you can earn outsized gains on Bitcoins. First of all, sometimes Bitcoin is cheaper on Sovryn than it is on other platforms because of the relative scarcity of stablecoins. Second, there very frequently arb opportunities. Third, as I mentioned previously, like with USDT today, the lending rate is extremely high and very profitable. But the most valuable thing is that right now is we are looking to distribute SOV token more broadly amongst the users of Sovryn, because we want the users to participate in the governance of the system. And so when we distribute it, we actually distribute it sort of locked so that you can participate in the governance. And right now, people who are participating as market makers, and probably from next week also as lenders, are going to be earning out and are currently earning out that SOV. And sort of the yield on a Bitcoin denominated basis right now is between 200 and 300% annually.
Well, very, very cool. Definitely something I want to investigate in the future. Awesome. Edan, thank you so much. That's been a really, really interesting first look at Sovryn for me. And I hopefully will do some more interviews and I'll dig deeper on this topic because it's fascinating to me. And I'm glad you gave me the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. And, for you and everyone else, let's all stay sovereign.
Absolutely. Guys, if you enjoyed this, please smash up that like button, hit the subscribe button. This is a really interesting thing for me. I'm going to, as soon as I stop this recording, I'm going to hit up Edan to give me some more context in the community. Hopefully I can get some more interviews and we'll find out more about this project because it's going to be very, very fun. Let me know in the comments below, is Sovryn something that you're interested in? Where do you think this Bitcoin on DeFi world is going to go? And is it something that you want me to pursue on this channel? So take care, everybody, and I will see you soon. Bye.